The air smelled of salt and freshly cut grass, a crisp blend that always seemed to sharpen my focus. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the field where our practice was about to begin. It wasn't just any practice. It was the first day of the season, and everyone felt it. The nervous energy buzzing like static electricity, the weight of expectations pressing down on us all. I adjusted the straps on my shin guards, trying not to let my anxiety show. My teammates joked around nearby, their laughter filling the space between whistles blown by Coach Ramirez. I forced a dimpled smile onto my face when Liam nudged me with his elbow. "You ready to crush it, Cap?" he asked, grinning wide enough to reveal his crooked tooth. "Born ready?" I lied, rolling my shoulders back. "Born anxious is more like it." But no one needed to know that. Not today, not ever. We started with sprints, the rhythm of pounding feet syncing with the beat of my racing heart. Everything felt fine until midway through the drill. A sharp cramp shot up my left calf, locking my muscles into an unyielding knot. I stumbled forward, gasping as pain radiated through me. Before I could catch myself, I hit the ground hard, palms scraping against the rough turf. "Mateo!" someone called out, but their voice sounded distant, drowned out by the ringing in my ears. And then there he was, kneeling beside me before anyone else had even reached me. His hands moved confidently over my leg, assessing the damage with clinical precision. "Relax," he said, his tone calm yet commanding. "Breathe through it." When I finally managed to look at him, really look at him, time slowed down. He had this quiet intensity about him, like nothing could rattle him. Not even a star player writhing in pain. His curly auburn hair caught the fading sunlight, framing a face scattered with freckles that made him look younger than he probably was. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and piercing, a shade of green so vivid it reminded me of moss under spring rain. "You're going to be fine," he repeated, pressing firmly into the muscle. The pressure hurt, but somehow his touch grounded me, pulling me away from the panic clawing at the edges of my mind. I tried to sit up, wincing. "Thanks," I muttered, embarrassed by how much attention I'd drawn. Everyone was watching now, the team huddled close, whispering among themselves. He smirked, leaning back slightly. "Don't push yourself too hard, Captain. You'll regret it later." His words lingered in the air, soft but heavy with meaning. There was something in the way he said them, not condescending but knowing, like he understood exactly what kind of person I was beneath the bravado. As he helped me stand, I noticed the slight accent coloring his speech. Israeli, maybe? It suited him, adding a layer of mystery to someone who already seemed impossibly intriguing. "What's your name?" I asked impulsively, surprising myself. "Elliot," he replied without missing a beat. Then, after a pause, he added dryly, "Try not to get injured again anytime soon. I don't want to make a habit of rescuing you." For some reason, his comment made heat rise to my cheeks. I wanted to say something clever, witty, anything to keep the conversation going. But before I could find the right words, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there awkwardly, clutching my still aching leg. Later that evening, as I replayed the moment in my head, I realized two things. First, Elliot wasn't like anyone else I'd ever met. Second, and perhaps more alarming, I didn't hate the idea of needing him again. The days that followed my injury blurred together in a haze of ice packs, stretches, and whispered reassurances from Elliot. He became a fixture in my life almost immediately, not just as the medic who patched me up, but as someone whose presence I began to anticipate with an intensity one didn't fully understand. It wasn't long before his visits felt less like obligations and more like moments I looked forward to. Elliot had this way about him, a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate even when he was silent. His dark humor caught me off guard at first. It was sharp, biting, and oddly comforting. During one session, after I complained about how slow my recovery felt, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Patience is overrated, but so are reckless soccer captains." I laughed despite myself, though part of me wondered if there was truth hidden behind his teasing. Did he think I was reckless? Or worse, did he see through the mask I wore every day, the one that hid my anxieties beneath layers of bravado? One evening, after practice had ended and most of the team had cleared out, I stayed behind on the field. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting golden light across the grass and turning the ocean beyond into molten silver. I stood at the penalty line, kicking ball after ball toward the net, each shot missing its mark by inches. Frustration bubbled inside me, hot and bitter, until I finally kicked too hard and sent the ball flying into the empty bleachers. "Careful," came a voice behind me, dry and amused. "You'll put someone's eye out." I turned to find Elliot leaning against the fence, arms crossed, clipboard dangling loosely from his fingers. His curls were unruly today, catching the fading sunlight in a way that made them glow faintly red. There was something effortlessly magnetic about him, even when he was doing nothing more than standing there watching me fail. "What are you still doing here?" I asked, bending down to retrieve another ball. He shrugged, pushing off the fence and walking closer. "Same thing you are, apparently, avoiding real life for a little while longer." His words hit closer to home than I cared to admit. Soccer had always been my escape, the one place where I could lose myself completely. But lately, even that refuge felt tainted. Every miss, every stumble reminded me of how fragile everything really was. How fragile I really was. "You're gripping the ball too tightly," Elliot observed, stopping a few feet away. "Relax your hands. Let it breathe." I glanced at him skeptically. "Since when do you know anything about soccer?" "Since never," he admitted with a smirk. "But I know about tension. You carry it everywhere, in your shoulders, your jaw, your grip. And it's going to cost you if you don't learn to let go." There was no judgment in his voice, only observation. Still, his words struck a nerve. For a moment, I considered brushing him off, pretending his insight didn't bother me. Instead, I loosened my hold on the ball, feeling the leather shift slightly under my palms. "Better?" he asked, tilting his head. "I guess we'll see," I muttered, pulling my leg back and sending the ball sailing toward the goal. This time, it sailed straight past the keeper's post and into the net. Elliot whistled low. "Not bad. Maybe you're not entirely hopeless." "Gee, thanks," I said dryly, though a small smile tugged at the corners of my lips. We fell into an easy rhythm after that, trading kicks and banter as the sky deepened into shades of indigo and violet. As the stars began to peek out above us, Elliot surprised me by asking, "Why do you play?" The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that before. Not seriously, anyway. Soccer was just what I did, what I'd always done. "To win," I answered automatically, shrugging. Elliot gave me a look that suggested he didn't buy it. "That's not why you stay late after everyone else leaves. That's not why you push yourself until your body begs you to stop." His perceptiveness unnerved me. I stared at the ground, scuffing the toe of my cleat against the grass. "Maybe I don't know how to quit," I admitted quietly. "That's not a bad thing," he said after a pause. "But sometimes holding on too tight means you forget why you started in the first place." His words lingered in the cool night air, heavy with meaning. I wanted to ask him what he meant, to pry deeper into the layers of wisdom he seemed to possess. But before I could, he clapped his hands together and grinned. "Come on, Captain. Enough philosophy for one night. Let's get you home before Coach sends out a search party." As we walked side by side toward the parking lot, I found myself stealing glances at him. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident yet unassuming, that fascinated me. Beneath his wit and sarcasm lay a depth I couldn't quite fathom, like the calm surface of a lake hiding currents far below. "So," I ventured, breaking the comfortable silence between us, "what's your story, Elliot? Why'd you become a medic?" He hesitated, his steps faltering briefly. For a split second, I thought he might deflect the question with another joke. Instead, he sighed softly and said, "I've seen people lose everything because no one was there to help them. I wanted to be the person who could make a difference, even if it's just for one person." His answer startled me. It was raw and honest in a way I hadn't expected, revealing a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "What about you?" he asked, turning the conversation back to me. What drives you, besides soccer? I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was, I didn't have a clear answer. Not anymore. Before I could stumble through a reply, we reached my car. Elliot leaned casually against the hood, studying me with those piercing green eyes of his. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, he said gently. Just remember, it's okay to not have all the answers right away. For reasons I couldn't explain, his words settled something restless within me. As I climbed into my car and drove away, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The whistle blew, sharp and insistent, slicing through the humid afternoon air like a knife. My heart raced in sync with the pounding of cleats on the turf as our team surged forward, chasing victory against our fiercest rivals. The stakes were high. This was more than just another game. It was a chance to prove ourselves, to silence the doubters who whispered that we weren't good enough. I pushed harder, faster, my legs burning with exertion. Sweat dripped down my temples, stinging my eyes, but I blinked it away, focusing solely on the ball ahead of me. We were tied, and the clock was ticking down. Every second felt heavier than the last, each breath shallower. And then it happened. I twisted awkwardly to block a shot aimed for the goalpost. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow. The crack of bone against bone, the sickening pop in my ankle, the way gravity suddenly betrayed me. Pain exploded through my body, white-hot and blinding, and I collapsed onto the field, clutching at my leg as though sheer willpower could mend what had broken. Voices swirled around me, distant and distorted, until one voice cut through the chaos. Clear, calm, familiar. Mateo! Elliot's face appeared above me, his green eyes wide with concern but not panic. His hands moved swiftly, assessing the damage without hesitation. Don't move, he instructed firmly, his accent thickening slightly under stress. Let me check. But I couldn't stop myself from trying to sit up, gritting my teeth against the agony radiating through my foot. It's fine, I lied, wincing. I'm fine. You're not, he countered sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. He glanced over his shoulder at someone behind him, probably Coach Ramirez, and called out, "Get the stretcher." As they lifted me off the field, I caught glimpses of worried faces. Liam shouting encouragement, Noah clutching her clipboard nervously. But all I could focus on was Elliot walking beside me, his presence steady and reassuring even amidst the whirlwind of activity. At the hospital, the diagnosis came quickly. A sprained ligament. Nothing permanent, but recovery would take weeks. Weeks when I wouldn't be able to play. Weeks when I'd have to watch from the sidelines while my teammates fought battles I should have been part of. The weight of disappointment settled heavily on my chest as I sat there, staring blankly at the wall. Soccer wasn't just a game to me, it was my identity, my purpose. Without it, I felt untethered, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Elliot stayed by my side throughout the ordeal, his demeanor calm but attentive. When the doctor finished explaining the treatment plan, he leaned closer to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You'll get through this," he said softly, his hand brushing mine briefly before retreating. "One step at a time." His touch sent a jolt through me, unexpected and electric. It was fleeting, barely noticeable, yet it lingered long after he pulled away. Recovery wasn't easy. Each day brought new challenges, both physical and mental. Physical therapy sessions left me exhausted, my muscles screaming in protest as I pushed through exercises designed to rebuild strength. But the mental toll was worse, the constant worry about falling behind, about letting down my team, about losing the thing that defined me most. Elliot visited me daily, bringing ice packs and stretches tailored to my progress. Sometimes, he'd bring books or music, claiming they'd help distract me from the monotony of rehab. Other times, he'd simply sit quietly, observing me with those piercing green eyes of his, as if he could see straight through the walls I tried so desperately to keep intact. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling session, frustration bubbled over. I threw the resistance band across the room, cursing under my breath. "Why does this have to happen now?" I snapped, glaring at nothing in particular. Why can't anything ever go right? Elliot didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up the band and handed it back to me, his expression unreadable. Because life isn't fair, he said finally, his voice low and measured. But you don't get to choose what happens to you. You get to choose how you react. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't comforting exactly, but they carried a truth I couldn't ignore. I stared at him, searching for some sign of judgment or pity in his gaze. All I found was understanding. I hate this, I admitted, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to sound strong. I hate feeling useless. He nodded slowly, as if considering his next words carefully. Feeling useless is hard, but being useless, that's a choice. And you're not making that choice, Mateo. You're fighting. Even when it hurts, even when it feels impossible, you're still here. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away furiously. I hated crying, hated showing weakness, especially in front of someone like Elliot. Someone who seemed so unshakable, so self-assured. Why do you care so much? I blurted out, surprising myself with the rawness of my question. Why are you always here? For a moment he looked taken aback. Then, slowly, a soft smile spread across his face. One that reached his eyes and softened their usual intensity. Because you remind me of myself, he said quietly. A little lost, a lot stubborn, but worth saving. His answer left me speechless. Worth saving. The phrase echoed in my mind long after he left, lingering like a melody I couldn't forget. That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed our conversation over and over again. There was something about the way he'd said it, not condescending or patronizing, but genuine, like he truly believed it. Like he saw value in me beyond the trophies and accolades, beyond the mask I wore every day. And maybe, just maybe, that scared me more than anything else. The days blurred into weeks, each one marked by a mix of progress and frustration. My ankle improved steadily under Elliot's careful guidance, but recovery wasn't just about physical healing. It was about learning to navigate the storm inside me, the doubts that whispered I'd never be the same again. Soccer had always been my anchor, grounding me when life felt too chaotic to handle. Without it, I drifted untethered. Elliot became my constant during those uncertain times. His visits weren't confined to rehab sessions anymore. They spilled into evenings spent on my couch or walks along the beach near his apartment. He brought books he thought I'd enjoy, classic novels with worn spines, and sometimes music playlists he swore would expand my horizons. One evening, as we sat side by side watching the sun dip below the horizon, he handed me a pair of earbuds. Listen, he said simply, pressing play. The melody that filled my ears was hauntingly beautiful, strings weaving through piano notes like waves lapping at the shore. This is... I struggled to find the words, caught off guard by how deeply it resonated with me. Rachmaninoff, he supplied, smiling faintly. I figured you could use something other than your usual playlist of top hits. I laughed despite myself, nudging him lightly with my elbow. You're ridiculous. But you liked it, he countered, raising an eyebrow. He was right, I did. And not just the music. These moments with him, quiet and unguarded, felt more real than anything else in my life. They stripped away the layers of pretense I hid behind, forcing me to confront parts of myself I'd rather ignore. It wasn't long before Liam started noticing. You've been spending a lot of time with Elliot lately, he remarked casually one afternoon after practice. We were sitting on the bleachers, sipping water bottles while the rest of the team packed up. So, I replied, feigning indifference. Liam shrugged, though his smirk betrayed his nonchalance. Just saying. You two seem close. My stomach churned at his implication. Was it that obvious? Did everyone see it, the way Elliot made me laugh, the way I sought out his company even when I didn't need physical therapy? I'm just trying to get better, I muttered defensively, avoiding his gaze. Sure, Liam said, drawing out the word. If you say so. His tone was teasing, but there was an edge to it. A question left unspoken. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that this thing between Elliot and me was purely professional. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true, not entirely. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying Liam's words over and over in my head. Close. What did that mean exactly? How close was too close? And why did the idea of crossing some invisible line terrify me so much? The next morning, I found myself standing outside Elliot's apartment building, hesitating before knocking on his door. When he opened it, surprise flickered across his face. "Mateo? What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk," I said quickly, brushing past him into the small living room. It was tidy, almost minimalist, with books stacked neatly on shelves and a guitar propped against the wall. "Talk about what?" he asked, closing the door behind me. I turned to face him, my pulse racing. "About us." His expression softened, though caution lingered in his eyes. "What about us?" "I don't know," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "Liam said something yesterday, and it got me thinking about how much time we spend together, about how different I feel around you." Elliot crossed his arms, leaning back against the doorframe. "Different how?" "Like I can breathe easier," I blurted out, surprising myself with the honesty of my response. "Like I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. Like..." I trailed off, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I sounded. Elliot studied me for a long moment, his green eyes searching mine. Then, softly, he said, "You don't have to explain yourself to me, Mateo. I already know." "Know what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That you're figuring things out," he replied. "That you're scared. That you trust me enough to let me see all of it. Even the messy parts." His words hit me like a tidal wave, washing away the walls I'd built around myself. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I didn't try to hide them this time. "And what about you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Do you feel the same way?" For a moment, he didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, closing the distance between us until our bodies were nearly touching. His presence was overwhelming, grounding me in a way nothing else ever had. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "But it's complicated." "Why?" I demanded, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why does everything have to be so complicated?" "Because of who we are," he explained gently. "Because of what people will say. Because I'm older, and you're still finding your footing. Because the world isn't kind to people like us." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I'd seen it. The whispers, the sideways glances, the judgment disguised as concern. But none of that mattered, not when I looked at him. "Then screw the world," I said fiercely, taking another step closer. "I don't care what anyone thinks. All I care about is you." Elliot's breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought he might pull away. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing mine tentatively, sending sparks shooting up my arm. "You mean that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "More than anything," I whispered. And then, slowly, hesitantly, he leaned forward, closing the remaining space between us. His lips met mine in a kiss so soft it felt like a promise, one I wasn't ready to break. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us spoke. Words felt unnecessary, inadequate compared to the weight of what had just passed between us. For the first time in my life, I felt whole, not defined by soccer or expectations or fear, but by the connection I shared with someone who truly saw me. As we stood there, wrapped in silence and the fading light of dusk, I realized something important. Maybe discovering who I was meant, embracing the uncertainty, the vulnerability, the beauty of being seen and loved for exactly who I am. Rumors travel faster than wildfire in a small town, especially one where everyone knows everyone else's business. It started innocently enough. A teammate saw Elliot leaving my house late one night and made a joke about it during practice. The comment was lighthearted at first, but the laughter that followed felt sharp, cutting deeper than I cared to admit. "Mateo and Elliot sitting in a tree," Liam teased, his tone playful yet probing. "Kissing." I forced a laugh, though my stomach churned with unease. "Funny?" I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe next time you'll be the one getting injured so Elliot can babysit you. The others chuckled, but the seed had been planted. Whispers spread like ripples on water, growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. By the end of the week, even Coach Ramirez pulled me aside after practice. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing for me to follow him into his office. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as he closed the door behind us, his expression unreadable. "What's going on, Mateo?" he asked, leaning against his desk. "There are concerns about distractions affecting your focus." My heart sank. Concerns. That vague word people used when they didn't want to say what they really meant. "It's nothing," I insisted, gripping the edge of the chair I sat in. "Elliot's helping me recover. That's all." Coach studied me for a moment, his gaze piercing. "I trust you, son, but you know how things work around here. People talk. And if those talks start affecting team morale..." He trailed off, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. I nodded stiffly, though my chest tightened with frustration. Understood. That evening, I called Elliot, needing to hear his voice. When he answered, his tone was warm but guarded. "How's rehab going?" he asked, skipping pleasantries altogether. "It's fine," I replied, pacing back and forth in my room. "But there's something else. Rumors are spreading about us." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of rumors?" he asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. "That we're close," I said, hesitating. "Too close." He sighed, and I could picture him pinching the bridge of his nose, the way he did when he was stressed. "This was bound to happen," he murmured. "Small towns have big mouths." "I don't care what people think," I blurted out, surprising myself with the intensity of my words. I hate seeing you avoid me at practice. I hate feeling like I have to hide this." "Hide what exactly?" he countered sharply. "We haven't defined anything, Mateo. What is this supposed to be?" His question stung, not because it was unfair but because it hit too close to home. We hadn't talked about labels or commitments, not because we didn't want to, but because neither of us dared to put words to what was happening between us. "I don't know," I admitted quietly. "All I know is that I don't want to lose you." Another pause stretched between us, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer but no less conflicted. "You deserve better than someone who makes life harder for you, Mateo. Someone who forces you to choose between being yourself and fitting in. You don't get to decide that," I snapped, anger bubbling beneath my skin. "You don't get to push me away because you're scared." "I'm not scared," he retorted, though his shaky exhale betrayed him. "I'm realistic. You're 18, Mateo. 18. You're still figuring out who you are, while I've spent years learning how to survive in a world that doesn't accept people like us." People like us. Those 3 words echoed in my mind, resonating with both truth and pain. For the first time, I understood why Elliot kept his distance. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much to let anyone hurt me. "But what if I don't care about surviving?" I whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "What if I just want to live, for once, with someone who sees me for who I am?" Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, softly, almost reluctantly, he said, "You deserve to live without fear, without judgment, without having to explain yourself to anyone." "And what about you?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Don't you deserve that too?" He didn't answer. Instead, the line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone, hollow and aching. The days that followed were unbearable. Elliot avoided me entirely, disappearing from practices and delegating my rehab sessions to Noah. She tried to fill the void he left, offering kind smiles and encouraging words, but nothing could replace the connection I'd shared with him. Each empty hallway, each silent locker room, reminded me of his absence, and of the choices I wasn't ready to face. One afternoon, unable to stand the distance any longer, I showed up at his apartment unannounced. Rain poured outside, soaking me to the bone as I stood on his doorstep, shivering. When he opened the door, Surprise flickered across his face before hardening into something unreadable. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cold. "I needed to see you," I replied, refusing to step back despite the storm raging both inside and outside. "There's nothing left to say, Mateo," he said firmly, crossing his arms. "Yes, there is," I shot back, stepping closer. "You don't get to shut me out. Not after everything." "After everything?" he repeated bitterly. "What exactly has changed? Do you think loving you will magically fix the world? Protect you from the hate and judgment waiting for us?" "No," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But maybe loving you will protect me from living a lie." His expression faltered, cracks forming in the walls he'd built around himself. "You don't understand what you're asking for," he said hoarsely. "This isn't just about us. It's about every sacrifice, every compromise, every moment of shame we'll have to endure. Then let me decide if it's worth it," I pleaded, reaching for his hand. "Let me choose you." For a moment he wavered, his guard slipping just enough for me to see the vulnerability beneath. Then, slowly, he intertwined his fingers with mine, his touch hesitant but electric. "You'll regret it," he whispered, though his grip tightened ever so slightly. "I won't," I promised, pulling him closer until our foreheads touched. "Not if it means I get to keep you." The rain continued to pour outside, drowning out the noise of the world beyond. In that moment, none of it mattered. Not the whispers, the judgments, the fears holding us back. All that mattered was the warmth of his hand in mine, the promise of a future neither of us was brave enough to dream of alone. The championship game arrived like a storm rolling in from the ocean. Inevitable, charged with tension, and impossible to ignore. The air buzzed with anticipation as fans filled the bleachers, their cheers mingling with the salty breeze that whipped across the field. This was it, the culmination of months of sweat, sacrifice, and struggle. And yet, all I could think about was Elliot. He hadn't spoken to me since our last confrontation at his apartment, though he'd resumed overseeing my rehab sessions with clinical detachment. His presence was constant but distant, his green eyes avoiding mine whenever possible. It was killing me, not knowing where we stood, whether what we'd shared had been real or just another fleeting moment swallowed by fear. Still, I told myself I couldn't afford distractions. Not today. Not when so much rested on this game. As the team gathered for our pregame huddle, Coach Ramirez's voice cut through the noise. "This is your moment," he said, his gaze sweeping over us. "Play with heart. Play like you've got nothing left to lose." Heart. That word lingered in my mind long after the whistle blew and the match began. What did it mean to play with heart? Was it about passion, determination, or something deeper? A connection to something or someone you couldn't live without? I glanced toward the sidelines, searching for him amidst the chaos. And there he was, clipboard in hand, watching intently as if memorizing every move I made. For a brief second, our eyes met, and everything else faded away. The roar of the crowd, the pounding of cleats against turf, the weight of expectations pressing down on me. All that existed was him, standing steady even as the world threatened to tear us apart. The game unfolded like a battle, fierce and unrelenting. Our opponents were relentless, their defense impenetrable. Every shot we took seemed destined to miss, every pass intercepted before it reached its mark. Frustration bubbled inside me, hot and bitter, until I felt like screaming. But then I remembered Elliot's words. "Let it breathe." I loosened my grip on the ball, slowed my pace, and let instinct take over. One step, two steps, then a burst of speed past the defender. Time seemed to stretch as I lined up my shot, the goalpost looming ahead like a beacon. My foot connected with the ball, sending it soaring through the air and straight into the back of the net. The stadium erupted in cheers, but all I heard was the sound of my own heartbeat. As my teammates swarmed around me, patting my back and shouting congratulations, I turned toward the sidelines again. Elliot stood motionless, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. A gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But I saw it, and it meant everything. Halftime came, and while the rest of the team retreated to the locker room, I stayed behind. Liam noticed and raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" he asked, tossing me a water bottle. "I'll catch up," I replied, waving him off. When the coast was clear, I approached Elliot, who was packing up supplies near the bench. He didn't look up as I approached, but I could tell he knew I was there. "We're winning," I said, breaking the silence. "So I saw," he responded curtly, his focus remaining on the task at hand. I hesitated, unsure how to bridge the chasm between us. Finally, I blurted out, "Why are you still pushing me away?" His hands stilled, and for a moment he simply stood there, frozen. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but laced with emotion. "Because I don't want to ruin you, Mateo. Because loving me comes with consequences I can't protect you from." "But what if I don't need protecting?" I countered, stepping closer. "What if I'm choosing this, choosing you, because I can't imagine a future without you in it?" He turned to face me then, his green eyes blazing with conflict. "Do you hear yourself? You're 18. 18. Your whole life is ahead of you, and I'm just baggage. A complication you don't deserve." "No," I said firmly, closing the distance between us until we were nearly touching. "You're not baggage. You're the reason I keep fighting. The reason I keep showing up, even when it feels impossible. Don't you see that?" Elliot's breath hitched, and for the first time, I saw cracks forming in the walls he'd built around himself. "It's not fair," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You shouldn't have to choose between being happy and being safe. And you shouldn't have to carry this alone," I replied, reaching for his hand. "Let me share it with you. Let me stand beside you, even if the world doesn't understand." For a moment, he resisted, his fingers trembling beneath mine. Then, slowly, he intertwined them, his grip tightening ever so slightly. "You'll regret it," he murmured, though his tone lacked conviction. "I won't," I promised, pulling him closer until our foreheads touched. "Not if it means I get to keep you." The second half of the game passed in a blur of adrenaline and determination. With renewed focus, I led the team to victory, scoring the final goal in the dying minutes of the match. As the final whistle blew, the stadium erupted once more, but my celebration was reserved for one person. I found Elliot near the exit, waiting quietly as the crowd dispersed. When he saw me approaching, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. But before he could say anything, I pulled him into a kiss, one that silenced every doubt, every fear, every whisper of judgment. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then, with a soft sigh, he kissed me back, his arms wrapping around me tightly as if afraid I'd slip away. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "Are you sure about this?" he asked softly. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "I've never been more sure of anything." Later that evening, as we stood together overlooking the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore in rhythm with our hearts, I realized something profound. Love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who reminded you of your own strength. Someone who challenged you to be brave, even when the world tried to break you. Elliot was that person for me, and as I held him close beneath the starlit sky, I knew we'd face whatever came next, together. Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. A quiet cadence of soccer drills, late-night conversations, and stolen moments between the chaos. Elliot became a constant in my life, not just as the person who mended my injuries, but as the one who stitched together pieces of me I didn't know were broken. Together, we learned to navigate the world's judgment, finding strength in each other when the weight of it threatened to pull us under. The whispers never fully disappeared. How could they? In a small town where secrets were currency and gossip flowed like water, our relationship was bound to raise eyebrows. Some teammates clapped me on the back with grins that felt genuine. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Parents muttered disapprovingly from the bleachers, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. But none of it mattered, not anymore, because for every harsh word or sideways glance, there was someone who stood by us. Liam became an unlikely ally, deflecting snide comments with his trademark wit and reminding everyone that winning championships trumped personal drama. Noah, ever optimistic, brought snacks to practice and made sure Elliot and I always had front-row seats at team dinners. Even Coach Ramirez softened over time, acknowledging our bond with a rare nod of approval after particularly grueling matches. Still, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were nights when doubt crept in, whispering insidious questions about whether we'd made the right choice. Nights when Elliot would sit quietly on the edge of his bed, staring out at the moonlit ocean, his face etched with the kind of sadness only survivors understand. "You okay?" I'd ask gently, sitting beside him. He'd nod, though his silence told a different story. "Just thinking," he'd reply eventually, his voice barely audible, "about everything we've sacrificed and everything we haven't." And I'd wrap my arms around him, holding him close until the storm inside him quieted. Because no matter how much the world tried to convince us otherwise, love wasn't supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be worth it. One crisp autumn afternoon, months after our championship victory, Elliot surprised me with a trip to the beach. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the waves rolled lazily onto the shore, their rhythm steady and soothing. We walked barefoot along the shoreline, the sand cool beneath our feet, the sky painted in hues of gold and lavender as the sun dipped toward the horizon. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Elliot asked, glancing at me with a wry smile. "How could I forget?" I replied, laughing softly. "You practically forced me to listen to Rachmaninoff while I sulked about being injured." "I didn't force you," he countered playfully. "I merely suggested it. And look how cultured you've become since then." "Culture is subjective," I teased, nudging him lightly with my shoulder. We fell into a comfortable silence, the sound of crashing waves filling the space between us. After a moment, Elliot stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression suddenly serious. "What?" I asked, tilting my head curiously. He hesitated, his fingers brushing against mine before intertwining them tightly. "I wanted to thank you," he said finally, his voice soft but resolute, "for choosing this, for choosing me, for believing in something, even when I couldn't." My throat tightened, emotion swelling in my chest. "Elliot." "No, let me finish," he interrupted, squeezing my hand. "When I met you, I thought I'd given up on the idea of happiness, of love. I convinced myself it wasn't worth the risk, the pain, the loss. But you refused to let me settle for anything less than what I deserved. What we deserve." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away, focusing instead on the sincerity in his gaze. "You saved me too, you know," I admitted quietly. "Before you, I spent so much time pretending to my dad, to my teammates, to myself, that I forgot what it felt like to be real, to be seen. You reminded me who I am." Elliot smiled, his green eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Then I guess we saved each other." As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red, I realized something profound. Love wasn't about erasing pain or silencing fear. It was about creating a safe place to carry those burdens together. With Elliot, I found not just acceptance but courage, not just comfort but growth. Together, we built a sanctuary amidst the storms, a refuge where we could simply exist as ourselves, flaws and all. Later that night, as we lay side by side on the couch in his apartment, listening to the distant hum of the ocean, I felt a sense of peace I'd never known before. Soccer still defined part of who I was. It always would, but it no longer consumed me entirely. Instead, it coexisted alongside something deeper, richer, more enduring. Elliot shifted slightly beside me, resting his head on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured sleepily. "The future," I replied honestly. "About how far we've come, and how much farther we'll go." He chuckled softly, his breath warm against my neck. "Careful, Captain. Don't get ahead of yourself." "I'm not getting ahead," I said, smiling despite myself. "I'm just dreaming." And for the first time in my life, I believed in the power of those dreams. Not because they promised perfection, but because they offered possibility. Possibility for love, for growth, for a life lived authentically and unapologetically. With Elliot by my side, I knew anything was possible.